In this episode, we talk about some very interesting interactions between marine creatures, including the boxer crab and the Yeti crab. We also have a look at fireflies, which are just absolutely amazing. That and more coming up in an Ecologist Plays. Well, hello there all you absolutely magnificent people, and welcome back to another episode of an Ecologist Plays. We talk about nature while playing games. My name is Will, I'm an ecologist by training, and we are back in Coral Island. Now we're just gonna grab the scrap over here because, well, we need to make the extractor, which is right over here. And there we go, we finally have that as well. Now today we are going to be talking about kelp. And as you can see here, we can use the extractor to get some kelp essence, and that is very, very important. Now I do believe we should head over to Ling, and she will be at the lab, but you know what, we're going to visit her after we have made our first kelp essence here, and it's not going to be too long, so I'll be back in a moment. And there we go, our first one's done. Let's quickly head on over to Ling, and then we'll go for another dive. Now, interesting here that Ling mentions that she bred supercoral which are able to survive rising ocean temperatures. And while rising ocean temperatures and ocean acidification are some major problems that coral reefs do face. So interesting that she has bred these supercoral specifically to handle those conditions. And now let's actually head on over to the ocean. Now before we talk about the kelp, we do have this weird upside down jellyfish with its tentacles trailing upwards rather than downwards as we typically imagine with jellyfish. But there we go, there it says it lives upside down to expose its algae to the sun, and well, that is just absolutely fascinating. So therein lies the reason for this upside down behavior of the jellyfish. Now they don't rely 100% on the algae for their own survival. Instead, they will use the tentacles and the stinging cells that they contain to catch prey. But they also have these so-called zooxanthellae, which are dinoflagellates, a type of algae, and they are able to photosynthesize. And of course, being photosynthetic, those dinoflagellates require sunlight in order to photosynthesize. So the jellyfish here spends a lot of its time upside down, with the tentacles facing upwards, and in that way the zooxanthellae gets the sunlight they require to photosynthesize. They obviously produce more sugars than they need, and they will pass a lot of it on to the jellyfish, and of course they receive the benefit of a nice place to live, a safe place to live, being in the tissue of the jellyfish. Now the jellyfish will also have, and doesn't say it here, but they very often also have a mutualistic relationship with certain shrimp species which will live amongst the tentacles here. They're not stung by the tentacles, they know how to avoid it, and they will remove parasites from the jellyfish, and in that way the jellyfish gets cleaned and the shrimp gets a relatively safe house where very few things will actually get to them. So a nice little mutualistic relationship. Mutualism being when two organisms or two species are in a close relationship with one another, a type of symbiosis, and both parties benefit by that association. So the zooxanthellae and the jellyfish, they are mutualistic partners, as well as the shrimp and the jellyfish. So that's just absolutely fascinating. I love it. Now I did say we were going to chat about kelp, and here we are, a whole bunch of kelp right over here. Now even though they do look very plant-like in appearance, they are in fact not plants. They are very, very distantly related to plants. Instead, they are a type of heterocont, which are a completely different group of organisms. They are sometimes classified as protists, but they do function very similar to plants on land. They are photosynthetic, so in that way they are similar to plants on land. But interestingly enough, even though they look perhaps a little bit more primitive than plants, they are in fact a much more recent addition to Earth than terrestrial plants. But both groups do photosynthesize, so the kelp here are able to photosynthesize, but they don't have the same structure as trees or other terrestrial plants. They do have this stem-like structure, we call it the stipe here in the kelp, and they do have leaf-like structures which we call fronds, and those fronds will vary depending on the species. But they don't have true roots. They don't have roots that are able to take up nutrients from the sediments here. So the way they actually take up nutrients, instead of taking it up with their roots, they take it up through diffusion through their tissue, and they can also take it up directly through their fronds and their stems by certain compounds on the cells on the outside binding to the nutrients they require and simply transporting it to where it needs to go. Now you will notice that these kelp here actually have these weird little bladders all along here, and this makes me think that what we have here is a Macrocystis, a genus of kelp that we find in many areas around the world. And that bladder there is actually filled with gas, and it keeps the whole plant kind of upright. They are also one of the fastest growing kelp genera in the world. growing up to half a meter a day. That's 20 inches a day that they can grow. And they also can grow extremely long, up to 80 meters or more. That's more than 200 feet in length. That is just amazing. Of course, they will form very dense stands, which we call kelp forests, that are extremely important habitats for many marine organisms. Fish and urchins and all kinds of stuff will live amongst them. But we are going to be harvesting some. Now, of course, we are going to be as ecological as possible. We're not going to harvest all the kelp. We're going to leave this stand over here. Where we do find kelp, we are just going to harvest some of them. We're not going to harvest all of it. Now, kelp are particularly vulnerable to urchins. So in areas where there isn't a lot of harsh wave action, urchins are able to climb onto the kelp and actually eat them up. And they can decimate the populations of kelp, resulting in what we call urchin barrens, which is when you have basically just urchins covering a large area and all the kelp have basically been eaten by those urchins. Really, really horrible. Now in South Africa, it's highly unlikely that's going to happen because we have got very, very harsh wave action here where our kelp forests actually occur. But in other areas, some species, for example macrocystis here, they prefer growing in calmer waters. They're not able to really survive in areas with very harsh wave action. So in those areas, they are particularly susceptible to an increase in urchin numbers. And we'll chat about what could potentially cause urchin numbers to increase so drastically. We'll chat about that, I'm sure, at some point in the future. For now though, I'm just going to quickly eat the candied tree seed here, because there is a little thing we need to go and catch right over there. And that's a little crab we call the boxer crab. Now it's hiding amongst the trash there. Not great for us. Let's see, can we perhaps... There we go. Yes, we could catch it. So that's a pom-pom crab, they call it in the game here. And what they have in their hands there would be little sea anemones. So that is very, very fascinating. And it's interesting that they mentioned something here. They say that when threatened, it picks up stinging anemones in its claws and brandishes them to scare off enemies. And you know what? This is what we believed for so many years, that they carry around these little anemones as a defense mechanism, because the anemones have got stinging cells, the crabs don't have stinging cells, so they are a little bit more vulnerable to predation. They've got a relatively soft shell, hard but soft compared to many other crab species, and so they carry around these anemones as a defense mechanism, and many textbooks may show them with these little anemones boxing fish and other predators that may come too close to them. Now, the thing is that relatively recently we found that that is really not the case. Very rarely may they even use these anemones for protection. And previously it was also believed that this was a form of mutualism that we just talked about, where the crab obviously benefits from these anemones with protection they grant, and the anemones getting food because the boxer crab could wave them around for them to actually catch food relatively easily. Okay, that sounds like mutualism, but relatively recently they found that the relationship here is perhaps a bit darker than we have believed for so many decades. Instead of mutualism, this is parasitism, because rarely will the boxing crab or the pom-pom crab here use the anemones for self-defense. Instead, what they are using these anemones for are to catch food, but not to let the anemones catch food. No, they wave these anemones around, and then once the anemones have enough food, the crab will then steal the food that the anemone obtained. So this is a form of kleptoparasitism, where the boxer crab steals the food that the anemone has caught. And this is to the detriment of the anemone, because they expend energy trying to catch food, but they don't get to eat the food, so they are negatively impacted by that relationship. So that is parasitism in this case. It's a fascinating association though. Very often these crabs also kind of keep these anemones starved so they don't grow too quickly, so they can carry the same two anemones around for an extended period of time. But yeah, for many, many, many decades we believed that is a very nice mutualistic relationship. Yeah, it turns out it's a bit darker than we thought it is. Very fascinating, but darker. And there we go, we have cleared another site. Oh, and look at that, we've got a Yeti crab, also known as a Yeti lobster right over there. Oh man, let's actually try and catch this one. It is moving away from us a little slowly, so we may be able to catch up to it. And there we go. Great stuff. And again, they mention a very interesting tidbit. In this case, it is actually true. The main source of food for the Yeti crab here would be the bacteria that it grows in its pincers. The pincers here are extremely hairy. It's covered with not like hair like us, but with setae, hair-like structures, functioning like hairs. And in this case, it's a nice growing area for the bacteria that grows there, that the Yeti crab will feed on. Now the Yeti crab is, it is just more amazing than one could imagine looking at this little hairy little thing here. So they found not in the shallow waters that we are currently in. Instead, they are actually found in very, very deep waters. They are found near hydrothermal vents, which are very hot environments, and they're also found in cold seeps. Now you'd think, okay, cold seeps are probably very cold, but it's not actually cold. It is also much warmer than the surrounding ocean water. It's just called cold seeps because they are colder than those hydrothermal vents, which are typically very, very hot environments. But cold seeps are areas where hydrogen sulfide and methane and other hydrocarbon compounds are very commonly found. So that is very important because being in the deep ocean, one thing that is lacking is sunlight. So you can't have photosynthesis there where these Yeti crabs occur. So what do they feed on? Well, they feed on those bacteria that, as mentioned there, grows on their pincers, among the setae here, amongst the hair-like structures. And those bacteria there are chemosynthetic bacteria, meaning that they take that hydrogen sulfide and the methane and all those compounds and they break them apart, and in the process it releases energy which they can then use, and it also enables them to take some of those compounds and use that for protein synthesis or the production of proteins and sugars and all the things that they may need in their day-to-day life. And of course, with the bacteria, if they do well, then the Yeti crab can feed on the bacteria that they're growing. So they will actually try to help the bacteria do better. And the way they do that is to increase water flow through the setae on their pincers. And they do that by actually dancing around or waving their pincers around these clawed appendages. They wave that around, and in the process, water flows through the hairs, which enables the bacteria to get more of those hydrocarbons and hydrogen sulfide for them to then use. And they do better. And because they do better, the Yeti crabs have more food. And because they wave their hands around like that, they're also sometimes called dancing crabs, which is just it's just so cute and so cool. I love it. But yeah, very strange that we actually have them here in the very shallow waters here. Also, we had encountered previously things like the sea mushroom, which I chatted about last time, also generally found in deep oceans, not in the shallow waters as we can find here. So perhaps that's the one gripe I have got. Some of the creatures are not really where they are supposed to be. But you know what? Yeah, we've got to suspend our disbelief sometimes. All right. Right, now it is basically the end of the day, so let's head on back to the surface, and then we'll come and offer the pom-pom crab here, and then we'll come and donate the upside down jellyfish, another pom-pom crab I caught, and the Yeti crab we got. Now I was just out taking a, well, not quite midnight stroll, but almost, and you can see there we have a firefly. Now, fireflies, of course, one of my favorite beetles in the world, of course, able to produce their own light through a process of bioluminescence, which is when a living organism is able to produce light. And they do this through a chemical reaction where they've got an enzyme that breaks up certain compounds and in the process releases energy, and that energy is then released mostly as light. Very little heat released through that chemical reaction. Instead, mostly light. And as it says there, they light up in the dark to attract mates and prey. Now, I don't really know about any species that attract prey that way. Maybe some of the larvae will actually attract prey because the larvae don't look like this. Instead, they are little worm-like creatures with little legs, and they are crawling around on the soil. And females also are, in fact, usually larviform, meaning that they resemble the larvae. This is most likely a male. Males look like this. Males also generally fly. Females usually, in most species at least, unable to fly. They don't look like this at all. Instead, they look kind of like that, which is a female or a larva. I don't know. They look very, very similar. But yes, they do attract a partner that way. So the males will be flying around and they produce flashes, and the flashes can be used to differentiate between different species. The duration of the flashes, the way that they move along in the air here will also indicate which species they are. And if there is a female in the undergrowth here and she sees a male that is flying around and flashing the light on his bum that way and she likes it, she may also produce a light to attract him to her. And of course, if successful, they will then mate, producing offspring that way. Now, if you are a little creature flying around at night, producing light, why don't more things eat you? Why are you not eaten by all the nocturnal predators, things like bats and nightjars and all kinds of birds that are active at night? Well, it's because they generally are toxic. They are not edible, and most things will tend to avoid potentially, getting poisoned. So they avoid eating fireflies. So it could be that the light they produce actually started off as a way for them to advertise that, listen, we are not edible, leave us alone. And then over time, it was selected for reproduction. So it then became more common in the population, eventually becoming a characteristic of the whole group. So yeah, I just think they are absolutely stunning insects. But there we go, that's the end of the day. And will you look at that, we now are town rank F. And we made quite a bit of money, which is always nice. But you know what, I think this is a good time to end today's episode. But at least we did chat about quite a bit of mutualism and parasitism and a whole bunch of weird and wonderful interactions. Of course, next time I'll be back with a new enshrouded video. Another video thereafter will be another Coral Island video. Next time we are going to attend the tree planting festival, and we're just going to be wrapping up spring here and leading us then into the next season. So then we are going to have all kinds of wonderful things happening in summer. So if you've got any questions or comments, please pop them down in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer as best I can. And until next time, everybody, stay safe. I'll see you all soon. Cheers.